You know the image: the long, dark coat, the wide-brimmed hat, and of course, the bizarre, bird-like mask. In video games and films, the Plague Doctor is a figure of macabre mystery, a grim hero fighting a doomed battle. But what if that image is almost entirely a lie? Forget the mysterious crow-like figure you think you know. The reality is far grimmer. That iconic beak wasn't a symbol of power. It was a desperate, herb-stuffed shield against a world drowning in death, a shield that didn't even work. The man behind it was likely not a master physician, but a second-rate healer, or an outright fraud, paid a fortune to walk through hell. This isn't a story about heroes. It's a story about desperation, futility, and why being a plague doctor was far, far worse than you could ever imagine. Section 1. The Second-Rate Doctor. So who were these men? When the plague rolled into a city, it shattered society. It took the rich, the powerful, and crucially, the city's most respected physicians. Faced with an unbeatable enemy, many of these well-trained doctors did the only logical thing. They fled. So who was left to sign a contract with a terrified town council to walk into a biological apocalypse? For the most part, not the best and the brightest. Plague doctors were often second-rate physicians who couldn't maintain a successful practice in normal times. Many lacked any formal medical training and were known as empirics, a polite term for a self-taught amateur. These weren't altruistic heroes, they were mercenaries taking on a suicide mission. Ravaged cities would draw up shockingly generous contracts to lure people in. For instance, the city of Pavia hired a physician named Giovanni de Ventura in 1479 for 30 florins a month, a life-changing sum. These contracts could also include perks like a furnished house and even automatic citizenship. But there was a terrifying catch. By signing, the plague doctor agreed to treat only plague patients and live in strict isolation. He became a medical leper, a necessary evil the town both needed and feared. His appearance would cause people to bolt their doors, seeing him not as a healer, but as a walking omen of death. Section 2. The Terrifying Uniform. Now let's talk about the uniform. It's the most famous part of the myth, but also the most misunderstood. First, a critical correction. That iconic beaked costume was not from the medieval Black Death of the 14th century. It was designed much later by Charles de Lorme, a physician to French royalty, following a plague in Paris in 1619. The entire outfit was an early flawed attempt at personal protective equipment, based on the miasma theory, the belief that disease was spread by bad air rising from corpses in decay. The heavy, ankle-length coat, often made of waxed leather, was meant to be a non-porous barrier. The doctor also wore leather breeches, gloves, and boots, creating a suffocating personal prison. And then the mask. That unforgettable beak, described by Delorme as half a foot long, was a primitive respirator. It was stuffed with aromatic herbs like mint and cloves, which were believed to purify the evil air before it was inhaled. Of course, this was completely wrong. The herbs did nothing to stop the Yersinia pestis bacterium. The mask's two small air holes provided a direct entry point for airborne pathogens, especially for pneumonic plague. The glass eye coverings were one of the few elements offering any real, though limited, protection. Finally, the doctor carried a long wooden cane. It had a chillingly practical use: to examine patients from a distance, lifting bed sheets and prodding bodies without making physical contact. It was also used to ward off desperate patients who stumbled too close. The suit was a symbol of his profession, but also a tombstone for his era's profound and fatal ignorance. Section 3. The Futile Cures. If the doctor was an amateur and the uniform a failure, his treatments were a catalogue of horror. A plague doctor's toolkit was based on the ancient theory of humors, which taught that sickness was an imbalance of 4 bodily fluids. Applied to a virulent bacterium, this was catastrophically wrong. One of the most common treatments was bloodletting. Believing the sickness would flow out with the blood, the doctor or a barber surgeon would open a vein. For a patient already weakened by fever and dehydration, this was often a death sentence. Then there were the buboes, the horribly swollen lymph nodes that gave the bubonic plague its name. The doctor's approach was brutal, lancing them. With no anesthetic or sterilization, he would slice the swellings open, causing excruciating pain and creating a gateway for deadly secondary infections. The cures only grew more bizarre from there. Some doctors applied dried toads to the buboes, believing the creatures would absorb the poison. Another disgusting treatment involved slathering a paste made from human excrement onto the open wounds. If you were wealthy, you might get potions made from ground-up unicorn horn, usually narwhal tusk, or powders of crushed emeralds. For others, doctors prescribed literal poisons like arsenic or mercury, which simply killed the patient faster than the plague. The plague doctor wasn't just a witness to death. His treatments often made him an active, unintentional accomplice in his patient's suffering. Section 4. Constant danger and social isolation. The psychological toll of this job is nearly impossible to comprehend. The most common form of the disease was bubonic plague, with a mortality rate of 30 to 60%. But it could get much worse. Septicemic plague infected the bloodstream, causing tissue to turn black from gangrene. And if the bacteria reached the lungs, it became pneumonic plague, spread by coughing and fatal in nearly 100% of cases if left untreated. The doctor was surrounded by this reality every day. He performed high-risk procedures like lancing buboes that exposed him directly to infectious fluids. Despite his suit, the risk of infection was astronomical. It's no surprise that the career of a plague doctor was often brutally short. This constant threat of death was compounded by profound social isolation. The plague doctor was not a hero, he was a pariah. His appearance on a street meant death was near. People fled at the sight of him, bolting their doors and pulling their children inside. This stigma was officially sanctioned. As part of their contracts, plague doctors were legally required to live in isolation, forbidden from interacting with the healthy public. They couldn't go to church, a tavern, or the marketplace. They were seen as tainted, cursed by their proximity to so much death. Section 5. More accountant than healer. Perhaps the most soul-crushing part of the job was realizing that the primary function was often not to heal. In the face of a disease they couldn't cure, city officials gave plague doctors a set of bleak, administrative duties. He was, in essence, a bureaucrat of the apocalypse. A major part of his job was to keep records of who was infected and who had died, tallying the human cost for city officials. Another official duty was to witness the signing of wills. No ordinary official would dare enter an infected house, so the plague doctor would stand over the dying as they gasped out their last wishes. They were also sometimes tasked with performing autopsies, not for medical research, but to confirm for city records that the plague was the cause of death. The plague doctor was hired as a physician, but his most important tasks had little to do with medicine. He was a record keeper and legal official who managed the logistics of mass death. His true role was not to stop the wave, but merely to count the drowned. So the next time you see that iconic beaked mask, remember the tragic reality. Picture an unqualified man, hired out of desperation, suffocating inside a leather suit that offered false hope. Remember his horrifying, useless treatments, born from deadly ignorance. Think of the crushing loneliness and the constant gnawing terror of knowing that every patient could be the source of your own agonizing death. The plague doctor's story is not a gothic romance. It is a story of human desperation. He wasn't a hero or a villain. He was a grim functionary of death, paid to perform futile rituals because, in a world collapsing into chaos, that was the only thing left to do. What part of the plague doctor's reality do you find the most horrifying? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more dark truths from history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.